On the 28th of June 1914, a lonely and dejected figure stood by a bridge in what was then the Austrian city of Sarajevo. His name was Gavrilo Princip, and he was feeling quite despondent because earlier in the day he'd been part of a plot to assassinate the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and the plot had failed. Gavrilo and 6 other associates had been spread out along the route of the motorcade for the Archduke, with instructions to each have a go at assassinating him as he came along. The first assassin lost his nerve, let the car pass by without doing anything. The second assassin threw a grenade at the Archduke's car. The Archduke's driver, being alert, seeing the incoming projectile, sped up, gunned the car, and the bomb went off under the third car in the motorcade, causing a lot of injuries and the shrapnel injuring people amongst the crowd. In the ensuing chaos, the Archduke and his wife Sophie were sped away, and Gavrilo never got a chance to carry out his assassination attempt. However, as is often the case in momentous events which shape world history, luck was to play a significant role that day. Later in the day, the Archduke and his wife, as a show of good faith, decided to go and visit some people in the hospital who'd been injured in the earlier bombing, the earlier attempt on the Archduke's life. His driver took a wrong turn and turned into a street. Realising this, the driver quickly tried to reverse out, but the car stalled. And while the driver was trying to get the car going again, the fickle finger of fate came into play, as it often does. You see, that street they turned into happened to be the one where Gavrilo was standing. So, seizing his opportunity, he rushed forward and he shot both Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, killing them both, in what many historians attribute to being the catalyst for World War I. On that day, on the June of 28th, 1914, millions, tens of millions of people were going about their life, living their day, not realising that events had already been set in chain that would ultimately claim those lives, and that many of those people who were happily going about their peaceful day would soon be caught up in the First World War and would die horrific deaths as a result. And the question I want to put to you today is, are we currently living our own June 28th? Are events in play which ultimately may lead to a Third World War and claim many of our lives? Fuck, I hope not. I hope I'm wrong. Anyway, that's what we're going to discuss today on this week's Friday News Review. So, welcome to Friday News Review for Friday the 18th of July. And before we get into the impending Armageddon and world apocalypse, let's look at things a little closer to home. Let's look on the bright side, because we have a few impending Armageddons of our own happening here in Australia. The impending end of free speech and the impending Armageddon to silencing dissent. And of course, you probably guessed I'm talking about our new anti-Semitism envoy, Gillian Segal. A woman who was appointed, by the way. No one elected this woman. No one voted for her. She's been appointed and placed in a position to impact all of us without any say from any of us. So first off, you would have heard about Gillian's husband donating $50,000 to Advance Australia. Now, the little I interact with Advance Australia is usually when they put some stupid statement up on my Facebook feed and I make a comment pointing out how idiotic, inane and dumb they are. Advances are basically an arm of the fossil fuel industry. They're all about ending renewables, talking about how we need more coal and more gas and so forth. So basically we can write them off as a bunch of conservative fuckwits. Now, however, if people want to support that and people want to donate money to that, that's fine. That's their right and that's their business. The issue we have, of course, is that when you're in a position of public authority and you're making reports and recommendations for the government to implement, you must be seen to distance yourself as far as possible from any perceived bias. Now, I know that's a bit of a joke because there's bias, not perceived, there's bias that is real in politics all the time. And of course, Gillian's attempt to distance herself from her husband's right-wing views are that, it's his business, I didn't know anything about it, I didn't sign the check, so therefore I'm innocent. But of course, these people would have discussed it. I can just imagine the dinner conversation. Hello, darling. What right-wing neo-Nazi fascist group did you throw money at today? Well, now that you mention it. However, old Jill says it's nothing to do with me and I'm innocent. The problem with Jill now is that she has completed a report on anti-Semitism in Australia. Now, just to be clear, and I've said this many times, there is no anti-Semitism in Australia. There is anti-genocide. People are not protesting Jews. They're protesting the actions of a state which is engaged in live-streamed ethnic cleansing and genocide before our very eyes. That's what's being protested here. Now, Gillian has urged the government to adopt what's called the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance is it Association? Alliance. Okay. Their definition of anti-Semitism, which reads, and I'll read it so we get it right. The IHRA definition is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Now, the thing that will surprise Gillian and her ilk is I'm completely okay with that. I'm completely happy with that as a definition of anti-Semitism. Semantics aside, because of course, as we always point out in this program, the Semitic people, it's an ethno-linguistic group of the Middle Eastern region. Arabs and Palestinians are Semitic people, which I always love pointing out when people accuse me of being anti-Semitic. I retort by saying, well, no, actually, I'm quite fond of the Palestinian people. Usually fucks with their head a little bit because they don't know what they're talking about. However, let's accept that this bastardization of the word anti-Semitism to mean anti-Jew. And as I said, I've got no issue with that because I've got no issue with Jews per se. And there are a lot of wonderful Jewish groups. I've mentioned before Cecile Juraski and her Jewish Voice for Peace. There are groups around the world of Jews who ardently support a two-state solution and who vigorously distance themselves from Israel and Zionism. And that's one thing that's always amazed me, and it seems to be, it's not peculiar to religion, but it comes out in religion a lot. If I were a Jew, I would be condemning Zionism, I would be condemning Israel for the sick, twisted society which it is, and I'd be condemning the Israeli government for their genocidal actions. And I would be so vocal about it, because I would be saying, not in my name. I would be saying, I'm a Jew and I don't support this, as a lot of Jews are. So we need to clarify that none of this is about Judaism. It's about Zionism, which is a political ideology and has nothing to do with Judaism. Same thing happened with the Catholic Church. It amazed me the amount of Catholics who got their nose out of joint when the Catholic Church was criticised, when it was revealed that for decades, nay, centuries, the Catholic Church had been hiding, covering up, and facilitating paedophilia within its own ranks. And Catholics got upset about this, about the criticism, and they stood by it. If I was a Catholic, I would be outraged because you are associating me with those horrible, disgusting practices. I would be so angry against my own church. It's something I've always had trouble grasping. And the same with the vast majority of Jews who, by nature identify with Israel, the Jewish state, and then try to defend its horrible actions rather than turning around and going, that ain't what we're about. Okay, So let's take a little bit of a closer look, and I've gone to the IHRA's own website and looked at what they define anti-Semitism as. And as I said, it sounds perfectly reasonable, doesn't it? Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. This is how legislation gets passed in democratic countries, by framing the laws in such a way as they seem perfectly reasonable. And that statement and its own, as I've said, is perfectly reasonable, and I agree with that. Hatred towards any group is wrong and is a crime. And anyone then who stands up against this legislation, against this document, is, targeted, made out to be some kind of religious nutter, to be anti-Semitic, because it sounds so plausible what Gillian is trying to get enacted in our parliament. But let's read on a little bit. Manifestations might include the targeting of the State of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity. So here, Gillian is trying to get a law in which basically says, if you target Israel, if you criticize Israel, it's anti-Semitism, it's a crime. Now, number one, you can criticize any nation. If you criticize Italy, do Catholics get upset and complain? If you criticize China, do Buddhists get a complain, or you criticize Tibet? You have a right to criticize any nation, and you should criticize nations where it's warranted. But Gillian and her ilk want to make that a crime. In a country that purports to be one of free and openness, it's a crime then to criticize one specific country. And why just Israel, Gillian? Why just you people? Then, of course, they put the sweetener in. However, criticism of Israel, similar to that levelled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. You see, that's the line. That is the sentence she would pull out and throw at you in some public forum when you're criticising this legislation. And say, well, we're saying you can criticise us as long as you can criticise Israel, as long as it's the same as you would do with any other country. Sounds perfectly reasonable on the surface. But as the great steak knife had always said, but wait, there's more. So we'll scroll down and we'll have a look at what the IHRA say about this. Contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, the media, schools, the workplace, and in the religious sphere could, taking into account the overall context, include, but are not limited to. Bing, worry once again, not limited to. When you create laws, you must frame them in very specific, limited terms. When you have any law or any legislation which states, but it's not limited to, you open the gate for interpretation. What I interpret may be different to what you interpret. So once again, who's to determine what this is not limited to? Who's making these determinations? You're entering into a dangerous sphere there. But what are they talking about? Point 1. Calling for, aiding or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of radical ideology, blah, blah, blah. Okay, calling for the killing or harming of anyone is a crime. Why does it have to be an anti-Semitic crime? Okay, we already have legislation in this country which covers this issue. If you call for the killing or harming of anyone, it is covered under hate speech laws. You cannot do that. So why do Jews get a specific law just for them? Why are they so special? Okay, if you call for the killing or harming of Jews, okay, that's covered in our hate speech laws, and it is a crime already. That's already legislated. So we don't need a specific one for Jews. So Gillian, that point, fuck that off straight away. Point 2, making mendacious, dehumanising, demonising, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as a collective, such as, especially, but not exclusively, once again, not exclusively. So we can open the gates, we can widen the spectrum to add in anything we don't like. But not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions. Got news for you, Gillian. It ain't a myth. The Zionists control the American government, and Zionists by extension are Jews. So I dispute that point straight away and say, well, it's a valid criticism because it's true. Zionists have undue influence in our own government, which you, Gillian, are the shining example of. You are an example of how Zionists are actually unduly influencing or controlling our government. But the point is, whether you agree with that or not, to then say that people can't make that statement, it becomes a crime. Once again, see how these people are creating legislation not to defend Jews, not to defend Judaism, but to stop all criticism of any one group of people, in this case Jews, doesn't matter who it is, to stop criticism, to silence public debate. The people who keep holding themselves up as, champions of the only democracy in the Middle East, which we know is rubbish, but they want to come and now stop our democracy, our freedom of expression. If I think that Zionists are controlling the American government, this woman wants to make that a crime. This woman wants to enable legislation that will allow me to be prosecuted for saying that. That is me expressing my views. You see how these all start to border on thought crimes. These people want to control the way you think, and they want to make it a crime to think differently to what they believe you should think. Okay? This is dangerous. This is very dangerous. Let's go on. Accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, or for acts committed by non-Jews. Well, once again, okay, and I agree, you can't hold people accountable for what large groups do or other people do. I'm an Australian. There are things that Australia has done that I don't like and I stand vehemently against. I shouldn't be held accountable for them. However, okay, I have to accept that as an Australian citizen, I am part of that collective. I can't distance myself entirely, okay, but holding me accountable, once again, these are very, very vague terminologies, okay? And accusing Jews as a people, well, once again, this is what they try to do all the time. Jews, number one, are not a people. Jews are a religion, okay? Israelis are a people, okay? Israelis are part of a nation state. Jews, okay, are a group of religious people, as in the same way that Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Hindus, okay? So, once again, all of this is covered in the Anti-Discrimination Act, where you can't discriminate against people based on their religious affiliations. So we already have laws for that. We don't need specific laws that basically cover just Jews. Once again, okay, Jews need to accept they're part of a society. You've got the same protection as the rest of us. You don't deserve special privileges. Okay, that's not how our society works. That's how Israeli society works. If you want special privileges as a Jew, I suggest you move to Israel, okay? But here, you're just an Australian citizen. Deal with it, okay? Moving on. Denying the fact, scope, mechanisms, e.g. gas chambers, or intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of National Socialist Germany and its supporters, accomplices, during World War II, i.e. the Holocaust, which the Jewish world jury say the Holocaust refers specifically to just the Jews killed in that abomination, not the 5.5 million non-Jews who were also killed, which is, okay, that's their call, but I think that's a bit of a sad thing to do. Now, denying that the genocide happened, well, that's not a crime, that's just stupidity. You're denying history, okay? However, if you want to question that, or you want to look at it, and this is where I've seen this brought out, this anti-Semitic bullshit come out, where people online in social media have actually tried to look at actual figures to see how many people were killed, and they're immediately shut down as anti-Semitic, okay, or in some cases labelled as Nazis and so forth, simply because they're trying to go through and they're questioning what was the actual number, how do we know there were 6 million and so forth. Okay, see, once again, Gillian and her ilk are trying to shut down any thought, any debate, things that should be intrinsic to any free and democratic society. Okay? Now, if you don't believe that the Holocaust exists, that's not a crime. You shouldn't be able to be charged by the police for that. You should be ridiculed and told you're an idiot. Okay? But it's your viewpoint. You're entitled to think differently to Gillian. And this is the thing that Zionists are so dangerous. This is why they're a scourge in our society, because they want you to think exactly what they think, and if you don't, it's a crime. Well, no, I'm sorry, Gillian. We live in a democratic society. People are entitled to think what they want, and you don't get to control it, lady. Okay, moving on. Accusing Jews as a people or Israel as a state. Well, hang on. This is about Jews. What's it to do with Israel? Okay. This is about stopping victimisation of Jews in Australia, who are Australians, not Israelis. So why do we keep pulling Israel into it? But let's go on. Accusing Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. Okay? Once again, if I want to criticise Israel for exaggerating the Holocaust, that's going to become a crime. I can criticise Israel or any other country as much as I want. You don't get to determine that, Gillian. You don't get to dictate what I do and do not think. All right, so we can fuck that one off too. Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. Okay. Once again, is what's Israel to do with this? Okay, why do we keep bringing Israel into this? You see, what these people are trying to do is not protect Jews in Australia. They're trying to protect Israel, a separate nation state, which we have no obligation to protect. If we think that Israel is doing the wrong thing, we're entitled to say that. Now, if I think Jewish citizens are being more loyal to Israel, well then, I'm allowed to say that. I'm allowed to think that. You cannot control what I think. And look at the words, the initial word of the last two statements. Accusing. Okay? Accusing. You're allowed to accuse people of anything. Okay? An accusation is not a crime. This woman wants to make an accusation in this country a crime. If I accuse somebody of doing something, I can be charged for a simple act of making an accusation. Okay? Serious impingement on our civil liberties. Okay? Next point. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavour. Okay. Once again, we're bringing the State of Israel in to Jewish people. Okay. Now, first off, I've got news for you, Gillian. The State of Israel is a racist endeavour. It is a colonial racist state that was set up in 1948 and has sought to take over land non-stop since then and to ethnically cleanse the area in which it's located. Okay? You want to make me saying that now be guilty of a crime. Okay? The Jewish people have their right to self-determination. Once again, this thing, the Jewish people right to self-determination. Jews have rights to self-determination in this country. The Israeli people have a right to self-determination. The two are separate. Okay? They're disparate areas. Saying that Jews have a right to self-determination, okay, they do. In every country they live in, there are laws about self-determination. Israeli citizens have their own right to self-determination, okay. Israeli citizens are part of a racist state, okay. You cannot stop people from saying that, Gillian. You cannot stop people from thinking that. And it does not impinge on their right to self-determination, okay. See how they're trying to, once again, lock things together. So that if you say that Israel is racist, you're denying Israeli self-determination. No, you're not. You're just simply saying that Israel is racist. Two separate things. Deal with it, Gillian. You may not like it, but that's the way it's got to be. Okay. What else we got? Applying double standards by requiring of it a behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. By requiring of it. Oh, that must mean Israel. Okay. What's Israel got to do with anti-Semitic laws in Australia, okay? But once again, applying double standards by requiring of it a behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. Well, this one I find quite laughable because, because for decades, Israel has actually, okay, applied a double standard. It completely ignores all of the UN resolutions and motions that are passed against it, more than any other country on the face of the earth, by the way. And it doesn't, a behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. Well, Gillian, you're kind of right there, because I don't know any other democratic nation which actively engages in genocide. I don't know any other democratic nation which currently is involved in ethnically cleansing an area. I don't know any other democratic nation which deliberately breaks the Geneva Convention by moving its populace into areas it's occupied belong to other nations. I don't know any other democratic nation which has attacked, invaded, and holds territory of every single nation it borders and refuses to give it back. So the double standards, Gillian, are there for all to see, okay? but, applying double standards to Israel. That's comical. That shows how screwed up these people are. Using symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism, e.g. Jews killing Jews, etc., or killing Jesus. I guess this comes back to recently in Victoria we had a law where it became illegal to fly a swastika and Nazi symbols. Now, just for the record, I think anyone who flies a swastika or walks around with a swastika on their shoulder is a bit of a nut, okay? But you always have to be careful with legislation and laws, because once we step into these areas, it becomes a very, very dangerous slippery slope. Are we then going to at one stage say, well, it's against the law to fly a flag with a hammer and sickle, or if you fly a North Korean flag, you can be fined? You see, I firmly believe in a free country, you can fly any flag. If you want to fly a swastika, go right ahead, okay? It's different if you fly a swastika and then you go around saying we should put Jews in gas chambers. That's a crime. But the two are distinctly different things, okay? Flying a swastika is weird, but if that's what you want to do, that's what you should be allowed to do. However, I've always found that Zionists have this issue. I've had Zionist friends actually say to me, I can't look at your posts anymore because you put up a thing which showed Israel and it had a swastika next to it. And, my grandparents were killed in the Holocaust. Oh, okay, so your grandparents, two people that you never met, never spoke to, never had any interaction, they died decades before you were born. Well, guess what? My family, I had family members who died trying to free your grandparents from Nazi Germany in the Second World War. Does that mean anytime somebody flies a flag of the Kriegsmarine, because my uncle was torpedoed in the North Atlantic, I can't deal with it. Grow up, okay? Show some ticker. You know what? I never knew my uncle, never met him, never had anything to do, and he died decades before I was born. Tragic, but I can deal with it. I don't go to pieces every time someone mentions the Second World War, okay? So, we can flick that off. Drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. Once again, you see how many of these are thought crimes. They want to legislate to make you criminally liable for thinking things. Now, I've said for ages that the contemporary policy of Israel is identical to the Nazis. The three tenets of Nazism, I believe, mirror the three tenets of Zionism exactly, okay? We have God's chosen people, the master race. A homeland we need to expand upon, Lebensraum. Palestinians are animals, Untermenschen. Why is that a crime? And regardless, even if that's not true, if that's what I think, I'm entitled once again to believe that. And Gillian, you can't legislate against that. Okay? And if I want to hold Jews collectively responsible, okay, for the actions of the state of Israel, which is the last point, holding Jews collectively responsible. Okay, once again, what have Jews and Israel got to do with each other? When I talk about Israel, when I talk about the dangers of Israel, I talk specifically about Zionism, because Judaism is a religion and Jews are not by default Israelis. Stop trying to connect that together, Gillian, because what you're trying to say is that if I criticize Jews, I'm criticizing Israel. If I criticize, conversely, Israel, and this is the kicker, then you can say I'm criticizing Jews and I'm anti-Semitic. Bullshit. None of this document holds any water, okay? Now, underneath, the next thing it says, anti-Semitic acts are criminal when they are so defined by law. For example, denial of the Holocaust or distribution of anti-Semitic materials in some countries. Well, once again, we've covered that. Why is denying the Holocaust an anti-Semitic crime? Why is it a crime, per se? If you want to deny the Holocaust and you think the Holocaust has never happened, then as I said, you're not anti-Semitic, you're stupid. But you should be allowed to believe what you believe. If that's what you believe, that's fine. Once again, these people are trying to legislate how people think. And even people I don't agree with. I don't agree with people that think that way. But I do stand for the fact that they should be allowed to think that way if that's what they want. Okay? Criminal acts, here we go, it even gets better. Criminal acts are anti-Semitic when the target of attacks, whether they are people or property, such as buildings, schools, places of worship and cemeteries, are selected because they are or perceived to be Jewish or linked to Jews. Okay, look at the first part of that. Criminal acts are anti-Semitic. Okay, we already have legislation that covers this. Why do Jews want special treatment in this country? Okay, we don't need these to be anti-Semitic. If I go and spray paint pedophiles over a Catholic church, there's no specific law that refers to that because it's a Catholic church. So why should there be a specific one if it were a synagogue? The laws already cover this. We already have legislation to cover this. We don't need more. It is a criminal act to go and desecrate anyone. You can go and spray paint on your neighbour's garage. It's a criminal act. These things are already covered under the law. And we don't need to have specific, special consideration for people just because they're Jewish. Okay? That's what this is doing. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't penalise people for spraying things on mosques, on synagogues and so forth. At the moment, they're doing it because they're protesting genocide. And all you're doing by doing that is playing into the hands of people like Gillian, because they turn around and go, see how we're being targeted, see how we're being victimised. It's wrong, and it's silly, and it's pointless, okay? And not all Jews are Zionists. And as I've said many times on my program, there are some wonderful Jewish groups who distance themselves ardently and vehemently from the state of Israel and from Zionism and say this is not what Judaism is about. And that's wonderful. So this is already covered. Once again, this is another layer specifically for one group. That's discrimination, Gillian, when one group is getting special treatment, okay, which is what you want. That's what you're trying to do with this. Then we have the final statement. Anti-Semitic discrimination is the denial of Jews of opportunities or services available to others and is illegal in many countries. Once again, the denial of opportunities to Jews or any other group, that's covered in the Anti-Discrimination Act. You cannot discriminate against someone based on their religious affiliation. We already have a law for that, Gillian. Okay, it is not anti-Semitic. It is simply religious discrimination. Okay, we don't need, once again, something special for one little group of society. We're all treated the same, in this country at least. So there we go. They've gone through the background to what Gillian wants to have introduced and why we want to stop it and why this woman needs to be kept as far away from government and as far away from a position of influence as possible, because she and her ilk are dangerous. Now, let's move on. Let's go back to the story. Gillian's 49 key actions. I always think that's an awful lot of key actions. Oops, just bumped the microphone. For a problem which really doesn't exist. 49 key actions. And what is the key actions? What are the key actions that Gillian wants to do? She's looking, for example, in her report, she's saying that the government should reduce funding for any educational institution, say a university, where there are anti-Semitic views or anti-Semitic protests, where anti-Semitism is prevalent. Who determines that? I'm not sure. But that, once again, is another Zionist ploy, is the blanket approach. Now, even if there was anti-Semitism on a campus, say in a university in Sydney, why should the students in that university be penalised by having funding of the university reduced? Why should students who had nothing to do with what's gone on, who are just there attending uni, trying to get an education, why should they be penalised if the government suddenly reduces the funding for the university? And of course, we know what's behind Gillian's idea here, which is part of her ideology as a Zionist, is looking at what happened in the United States. Any protest about what's happening in Gaza that's not anti-Semitic, it's about a protest against Zionism, okay? People were being thrown out of the universities were losing funding, so the universities themselves self-censored and they clamped down to preserve their funding. And of course, that's what Gillian's all about. She's not about preventing anti-Semitism on universities. She's about preventing any kind of dissent or debate on a university campus regarding Israel and its horrific actions. Another one of her key recommendations, okay, and this is right out of the Trumpian playbook, screening applicants, visa applicants to Australia for anti-Semitic views. I called this channel, this YouTube channel, the Winston Smith Project, because I saw parallels with what's happening in our world today and Orwell's visionary work of 1984. And here's another wonderful parallel. What Gillian is basically saying is that anyone who has anti-Semitic views shouldn't be allowed into the country. Well, that's a thought crime. You can have views on anything in a free, democratic and open society, which of course we always purport to be. If you're going to stop people coming into your country because of the way they think, then you are basically charging them with thought crimes. You're controlling the way that people are allowed to think. And we saw what happened in America when an Australian got kicked out because, as he claimed, he had protests supporting Gaza on his mobile phone. That's exactly what Gillian and her ilk want to do. They want to stop anyone who opposes what they believe in coming into the country. Part of her other platform is then that anyone in the country who participates in a protest, who shows any anti-Semitic views, if they're on a visa, we get the government to revoke the visa and send them home. So once again, she's trying to silence dissent. If you are here on a visa and you attend a protest, as you are legally entitled to do and should be allowed to do, after all, we're all about democracy and freedom of expression. If she or someone, we have this mystery figure, Big Brother, deems that you're anti-Semitic and you're here on, say, a student visa or a work visa, the government can revoke your visa and send you back home because we don't want your kind in here. We don't want people upsetting the balance. And speaking of protests, the phrase she used is that we need to crack down on intimidating protests. Now, my experience with Zionists is they find everything intimidating. A bit of graffiti. I had a friend ring me up about graffiti and saying, I feel threatened. Grow some balls for a start. Okay, it's just graffiti. It's not anti-Semitism. But under Gillian's plan, any protest seen as intimidating would result in anti-Semitic charges and the protest would be managed by the police. So you can see where this is going. This amounts to total control of freedom of expression and total muzzling of any dissent. The other thing she wanted to do, she called it, we wanted to have, I'm just making sure I get the terminology right here. I've got to read it because I can't believe that in this day and age that we're actually even contemplating this shit. We have trusted voices in social media explaining what's going on in the world and fighting against anti-Semitism. Trusted voices. Is there anyone in government we do fucking trust? Is there anyone on social media that you do fucking trust? Trusted voices? What she means by that is people like ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which operate a massive network in social media with the stated aim of fighting anti-Semitism, is what she's saying. And we all know the ADL don't fight anti-Semitism. They target, they harass, and they try to destroy anyone on social media who says anything against Israel and who speaks in their mind about what's going on in Gaza. This is what this woman is trying to bring in to this country. This is what this woman is trying to do. And she wants influence, she wants work done on AI so that when you type a question in, is Gaza a genocide? AI is altered to show, less anti-Semitic views. Well, we all know what that means. We alter AI to go, no, there's no genocide going on. Israel's just defending itself. That's why it's bombing women and children. This is the sort of person that the government has appointed. And as I said to you, no one voted for this bitch. And now she's in there writing reports that are going to silence what you and I should be taking for granted, our right to speak out against what we perceive as wrong. That is fundamental. As I said last week, the fundamental tenet of democracy is not voting. It's being able to hold your government to account. And we should be able to criticise our government. Our government is sending parts for the F-35 fighter to Israel, working with Elbit, the great Israeli defence manufacturing company. We're participants in genocide. Where's Miss Penny Never-Wong now? What's she got to say on that? The Greens are calling the government out in Parliament. I hope more people do, because it's a disgrace. But this woman, this Gillian Segal, wants to stop you having the right to protest about that. She's not about anti-Semitism. She is about promoting Zionism and stopping anyone speaking out against the land of Israel. Concerning, to say the least. Now, just Further to that, I just wanted to point out some of the responses to Ms. Segal's plan. Now, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, needless to say, strongly endorsed what they called the urgently needed measures in the plan. And this is their quote: "We call upon all sectors of society, including government, law enforcement," oh yeah, baby, let's get those truncheons out, "the media, the university sector, education authorities, and online platform providers to cooperate with the Special Envoy and the Jewish community to give this action plan full force and effect." It was backed by opposition leader Susan Lee. we had an interesting program on her some time ago. Andrew Hastie, who's our Home Affairs Minister, ex-SAS soldier, he said we need a whole of government response to anti-Semitism, and of course the independent MP Allegra Spender has just gone along with it as well. What's interesting, however, is that the Jewish Council of Australia, now see, these are Jews talking, not old crazy Bintang. The Jewish Council of Australia has been critical of Israel's action in Gaza. Good on you, about fucking time, okay? Stand up for what you believe in. Don't go blindly along with them because you're a Jew. The Jewish Council of Australia looked at the 79 anti-Semitic incidents that Gillian was on about, and they found that just 1 in 5 of them met the definition of anti-Semitism, and that the rest were not actually anti-Semitic attacks. And they said that almost half of the incidents quoted in Segal's report amounted to support for Palestine or criticism of Israel or Zionism. Perfectly legitimate. So that's where we're at in Australia. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk a little bit about our fight or flight syndrome with our lovely Prime Minister, Mr. Albanese. Okay, so Anthony Albanese has gone to China to talk trade with the Chinese government. He's meeting with Xi Jinping, and I applaud that, because as I've said often on this program, for some reason we no longer have statesmen in the world. When we're unhappy or the perception of tension exists, rather than going and talking to these people and confronting the issues in a mature and adult manner, we tend not to talk to them, and we send weapons and bombs. For example, we're supporting Ukraine. If we have an issue with what's going on in Ukraine, why aren't we talking to Vladimir Putin? Wouldn't that make sense? Why are we only talking to Vladimir Zelensky? That is his real name, by the way. It's pronunciation. You say Adolf, I say Adolf. So I applaud the fact that Albanese has gone to China, because it's our biggest trading partner. We should be engaging with these people. And yet look at the continued rhetoric and the continued assault that's coming through from our media, talking about war with China. Now, first off, who wants to go to fucking war at all in the first place, right? Not me. Secondly, if you're going to go to war, particularly if you're Australia, why would you want to go to war with China? Let's take a look at what they've got and what we've got. And as you can see, we have absolutely no hope of defeating China militarily. But we don't need to look at defeating China militarily. You see, China is not a threat to us. Unlike us, when they're unhappy or dissatisfied, they don't go and bomb people or invade them. Oh yes, there's been some disputes in the South China Sea, particularly with the Philippines. You're talking where they've sprayed water cannon on boats and there's been a few clashes. They haven't invaded the Philippines. They haven't bombed the Philippines, which is what we do when we're unhappy with the nations or we want to exert our dominance in a region. And after all, it is called the South China Sea for a reason. It's in their backyard. So I want to talk about what this program really was about, was my concern with what's happening with the militarism, the build-up, and its parallels to what led to the First World War. So I want to just briefly go back to 1905. Bear with me. In 1905, the British Royal Navy had, for a long time, had a system called the two-power standard, where its navy was funded and equipped at a level that allowed it to be the equal of the next two largest naval powers in the world, at that stage France and Germany. So the British maintained this two-power standard. Now, due to an advance in technology, a stroke of luck or bad luck, depending on how you look at it, the British launched in 1905 the revolutionary warship HMS Dreadnought, which completely changed the face of naval warfare, and at a stroke effectively rendered all previous ships obsolete because of its advancements in large caliber gunnery and speed. And the British with that took a gamble because at a stroke they had lost their two-power advantage. And as we now know, what ensued was a naval arms race, predominantly between Britain and Germany, because the Germans now had a chance to catch up because the slates were cleared and Britain now, instead of having a two-power standard, had only one dreadnought. So there was a massive arms race. But the beginnings of that arms race came from more than just a desire to build more battleships than each other. You see, for years, the British and the French had been itching to go to war with Germany because Germany was starting to assert itself and starting to grow as a major industrialized nation. We also had the added fact that the European powers were and are colonial powers, and they sought to grab as much land as possible. You know, it's a horrific fact. Between 1850 and 1911, all of Africa, bar Liberia and Ethiopia, apart from those two countries, the entire continent was colonized by European powers. And Turkey, I guess you could assume, as a European power. So you had this land grab and this continuing rise of wealth and dominance, and nations seeing each other as potential adversaries because they saw each other as potentially being able to rival each other. Okay? Have a look at the situation we've been in for some time now with China, and now increasingly with Russia, and the difference between us and 1914 starts to narrow a little bit. Now, it got to a point, it was interesting, it was so bad, and this is relevant because I think it holds space today, so bear with me. By 1890, okay, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia had the largest land armies in the world. Their armies were so large that the only threat to them was each other. Starting to ring bells? In 1899, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia convened a conference, and it was an international conference by invitation only, so a lot of countries didn't necessarily have to come. But what he was trying to do was create a treaty, a limitation on armaments, because, as he rightly said, they were imposing a horrific burden on the world's economies. Countries, nations were spending so much money on arming and armaments that it was affecting their financial health and their ability to provide other things, schools, hospitals, education, all those other things we need. So what Tsar Nicholas wanted to try and stop the arms race was a treaty, and he actually set up an initial oh God, I'm looking for words. He set up a forum in The Hague where nations could resolve disputes by discussion, by arbitration, by negotiation, rather than going to war. And it was actually quite successful. It headed off quite a few, at least two major potential wars before 1914. But this is what was interesting, what Tsar Nicholas II said at the time. He said, the danger is, he said, we need to look at transforming the armed peace, okay, into a crushing burden that weighs on all nations, and if prolonged, will lead to the very cataclysm it seeks to avert. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? Here we have today NATO with, Queen Ursula von der Slaughter and that imbecile Mark Rutte. Now, the dog Rutte is all for 5% in, GDP expenses for all NATO nations. The Americans are pushing us to increase over GDP over 3% to be spent on defence. And this is my concern, and this is what I was talking about at the start of the show. I'm seeing parallels with what happened pre-1914 to what is happening today, We are living in a period of unprecedented military growth, expenditure, and competition among countries. Now, some of the issues that are brought up is China's increasing military capability. Well, the point is, China's economy is booming. Now, have a look at this. A share of GDP. I just want to put some examples. In 2005, China had 10% of the world's GDP. We're talking parity purchasing power, PPP. Purchasing parity power is the correct terminology. China had 10%. The United States had 19%, nearly double in 2005. By 2015, 10 years later, China's percentage of GDP, world GDP, had increased to 16%. The United States has shrunk slightly. It was also at 16%. So by 2015, China had achieved parity economically with the United States. 2025, this year, it's estimated that China will have 20% of world GDP. The USA will have shrunk to 15%. They will have overtaken. The parallels between what the West is doing with China and what the British and the French were doing with Germany in 1914 are so apparent and so concerning. We're moving towards creating an enemy because we fear not invasion, not war, we fear competition. The Chinese are outcompeting us. They're producing more. Their technology is advancing rapidly. And the way that nations traditionally have just attempted to remain and retain their hegemony is to go to war. And that's what's happening here. We are edging towards war, and we are educating the populace towards war. Look at some of the propaganda that came out around Germany, or aimed at Germany in 1914, trying to get the British public to hate the Germans, to fear them. They're coming to get you. Can you see the parallels with what we are told today? The Chinese are coming to get you. I mean, they sailed some warships around our country, and, we went off our heads. The opposition wanted the government to resign in protest, These warships sailed in international waters, and they did what we do continually, year after year, what we call a freedom of navigation exercise. We sail up and down the Taiwan Strait, off the Chinese coast, all the time, far closer than any Chinese warship has ever come to Australian coastline. And yet, when the Chinese tried to do the same thing, all of a sudden it's a provocative act. It's aggressive. We keep getting told China's aggressive. You see how you're being manipulated, you're being led to believe that China is your enemy. I had to mention this once before in a program I did, that a good friend of mine, who's smart, came to my house about 4 years ago. He sat down in my lounge room and he said, "You know what?" He said, "I think China's going to invade Australia within a year." And of course, as I often do, I fucked him with the most simple question: why? And he hesitated because he hadn't actually thought of why. He had just been programmed to believe that China was going to invade, that China was your enemy. Okay? It's been the Hun, it's been the Yellow Horde, it's been the commies. It's the same old story, and here it goes again. But my concern is, as I said at the start of this program, we may well be in the opening stages of World War III. And in fact, when the Russians started fighting in Ukraine, and if you know anything about that conflict began in 2014. It actually began in 1991 when the Soviet Union broke up and America determined that Russia could never be a competitor. And as I mentioned last week, we talked about the attempts to stop Russian exports of gas to Europe by piping it in through Syria and Turkey, which is why Syria had to have a civil war, because the Syrians wouldn't allow the Western companies to pipe gas into Europe and therefore try and destroy the Russian economy. You are continually being taught to hate a particular group of people, to be prepared for war. I mean, we're talking about preparing for a third world war. I don't understand how people can't see the insanity of where the world is heading. And my concern is that the events are now already in motion, which will ultimately lead to that war. And you'll remember, I think about 2 or 3 episodes ago in Friday News Review, I even postulated, is Zelensky the Archduke Ferdinand of his day? Is something going to happen in one of these flashpoints? And that's all it takes. Just a sharp, smart flash. And all of a sudden, we have an outbreak, a major war, whether it's Israel and Iran, whether it's us and China, whether it's the Ukraine. The danger is that the events are already in chain. Europe is arming itself like never before. The Europeans are engaged in an active war against Russia. I find the irony of this. We keep saying, we've got Donald Trump lately came out. I mean, Trump's always good for political laughter. But he came out in his discussion, he was sitting in the White House with the dog rooter, and they were talking about how disappointed they are in Putin. He's not negotiating. He's the only one who's always been open to negotiation. Zelensky is the guy who brought in a law, actually, which prevented him legally from negotiating with Putin. So how can Putin be the obstacle here? He's the guy who's never left the table. And yet, the same people that keep claiming to want peace are funneling massive sums of weapons into Ukraine. I mean, Donald Trump told us this war would be over the minute he took office. Yet another lie. Okay? And now he's trying to distance himself from it and say, well, it's Biden's war. No, Donnie, it's your war. You're funding Ukraine. You're giving them weapons to go and kill Russians. You're actively involved in this war. Can't anyone see the dangers here? The danger, the risk that this could easily escalate. And the Russians have said from day one that they're fighting NATO. They knew from day one. They weren't fighting Ukraine. They were fighting the collective West. And many voices in Russia have from 2022 said this is the opening salvo of the Third World War. My concern is they may be right. And when you look back at the parallels of pre-1914 and the tensions and the animosity that started to grow and the naval armaments race, now today we have the same armaments race where the Americans and the Europeans, NATO, are pushing for massive increases in military expenditure, taking money out of things like schools and education, things we should be spending money in, rather than negotiating with the Russians and the Chinese. We're antagonistic towards them. And the big concern now is that to counteract our influence, these people, we know, Putin came up with a brilliant idea, form BRICS, a completely separate economic bloc. They've recently just introduced their own banking system, which will replace the SWIFT system. They no longer need to trade through Western financial institutions. They no longer need to trade in US dollars. All of that is undermining Western authority in the world. All of that is undermining not just American dominance in the world, but American financial security. And what's one way that countries can get out of losing dominance, losing financial security? They can go to war, okay? Because wars are good for economies. Wars generate money. And if you defeat your opponent, then you regain your dominance in the world. This is my concern, that this is actually the stage we're at the moment, that we are unknowingly rushing headlong towards a major conflict. And you've heard American generals openly talk about the fact that we will be at war with China by 2030. Are you fucking out of your minds? We need to put the brakes on this now. We need to reduce military spending. We need to talk to the Chinese. We need to talk to the Russians. We need to end these conflicts amicably. Okay? Ukraine has to accept that it had a chance at the end of on the beginning of 2022 to end this conflict on terms that would have been very favourable to it. Yet Zelensky followed Boris Johnson's directive and instead of ending the war, kept it going. Zelensky, as I've said before, could be our Archduke Ferdinand. Let's hope not. But at some point, these flashpoints are going to get to the stage where there's going to be a large conflict and it's going to cost millions of lives, if not all of our lives. Therefore, it's something we should all be concerned about, and we should all be demanding that no more increases to money. End this AUKUS debacle, which is just funneling vast sums of public money towards America and the United Kingdom. Talk to our regional partners. Talk to countries like Russia. Talk with India, China. If we were smart, we'd get into BRICS. See, look at what's happening. You remember last week I talked about sanctions and how effective they are not. In 2024, the Indonesians were looking at replacing some of their fighter jets And the Americans immediately went to them with the FX, I think, correct, sorry, the latest iteration of the famous American F-15 Eagle fighter. And they said, we want you to buy this. The Indonesians, as is their right, looked around and they trialled the Russian fighter, the Su-35. And as anyone who knows anything about these two planes would not be surprised, the Su-35 basically shat all over the F-15. It's got better range, it can engage outside the F-15's missile envelope. Tactically, it's chalk and cheese. And it's cheaper. Now, so the Indonesians then said, no, we're going to buy the Su-35 from Russia because it's a better product. What did the Americans do? They said, if you buy that plane, we will put sanctions on your country. We will impose sanctions on you. In other words, we will force you to buy our inferior product or we'll financially cripple you. The Americans are kind of quaking in the boots. The West are quaking in the boots because, of course, for years we were told that all of the stuff from Russia and China was shit and that our Western technology was better, and if they had anything good, it's because they stole it. Well, look what happened in the recent incident between India and Pakistan. India had the latest European Rafale fighters. They were shot down by the Chinese-supplied J-20 fighter that Pakistan had. And in a massive turnaround, we realised that the Chinese aircraft were actually better than Western aircraft. This, of course, has created even more impetus for the West to arm and increase its already overwhelming military power. America has approximately, and I'll bring the slide up, 13,000 aircraft, military fighters. China has 3,000. So with a surplus of 10,000 more aircraft, I'm led to believe that I need to fear China. They've got 10,000 less aircraft than the United States, and somehow they're a threat, and I've got to give up my tax dollars instead of going into schools and roads and things that I want to see, hospitals. I've got to go and build submarines to sit off the Chinese coast and point missiles at China, as we talked about in a previous episode. So, as I said at the beginning of this program, I hope I'm wrong. I really, really hope I'm wrong. But I see the concern is that we are living in a similar time to 1914. We're being egged more and more and urged more and more towards militarism, towards confrontation, towards conflict. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is only going to end in disaster for all of us. Anyway, on that cheery note, this is Friday News Review, wishing you all, as usual, a good weekend, and reminding you, once again, as always, there are two types of people in this world. Please avoid them both.
It's not for me.